Hey, Jimmy Smith, yet again, with my betting picks for this weekend. It's UFC Fight Night 239. Heavyweights in the main event. This is one of those cards. It's a little strange by Fight Night standards. I'm not seeing a lot of who's going to move on and be great kind of fights. A lot of these are really one-sided, odds-wise. Couple close ones. I see what's going on in the main event, but as I'll break down later, the problem is I don't see a really high ceiling for either guy, and neither guy is an up-and-comer breakthrough possible heavyweight who's getting this opportunity. It's 9 and 10 in the division, respectively, and so I don't see the winner necessarily going anywhere. I don't see the loser like falling all the way out of the rankings, anything like that. So it's a very strange card when you talk about breaking it down and picking and all this stuff. So getting that out of the way immediately. As I said, a lot of fights with really, really dramatic odds. Meerschaert versus Barberena is how we're starting out the main card. This is at 185. The difference here is Meerschaert is an experienced 185-pounder and Bryan Barberena is not. Bryan Barberena has had moments of, I won't say great, he's not a great fighter, but he's had moments of competitive wins against guys that I didn't think it was, even an over-the-hill Robbie Lawler. That's an impressive name, I guess. People don't remember he had a breakout win over Sage Northcutt when people didn't think he was capable of that. So he has this weird ability to get wins when he shouldn't necessarily. And then the last few fights, he's had a lot of trouble. His last one, he did move up to 185, and his last one just looked outgunned in that fight. And then Rafael dos Anjos, who's on the wrong side of his prime, had no trouble at all with Bryan Barberena and stuff like that. Gerald Meerschaert is a middleweight I also don't have a ton of faith in necessarily. Most notable loss, Khamzat Chimaev beat him with the first punch he threw, knocked him clean out. So an experienced middleweight. He actually has, I believe, some of the records for, octagon time, stuff like that. A lot of fights at middleweight. But he just has never had outstanding success. He's been stuck in the middle his entire career. So once again fits in that theme of fighters like, okay, what does a win do? What does a loss do? In this case, not a whole lot. When I look at the odds, and I use Best Fight Odds because they have a bunch of odds for various books, and it's insane what I'm seeing here. Like -2.5 you can get on Gerald Meerschaert, Bryan Barberena, and get +205. For those kind of odds, two guys I don't have a lot of faith in, I got to go with Bryan Barberena. Simply because, Gerald Meerschaert, I understand him being the slight favorite, not 2.5 to 1. Meerschaert is not a great fighter by any stretch of the imagination. So, considering I'm not going with a lot of upsets, going with the upset on that one, Bryan Barberena over Gerald Meerschaert, just because the numbers are absurd. I don't know who won it for those kind of numbers. Next up, Macy Chiasson versus Penny Kianzad. This is a rematch of a fight I called. One of the last fights I called for the UFC in November 2018 was the Ultimate Fighter finale that Macy Chiasson won. She is big. She is a grinder. She is strong. When she puts pressure on, she's what I call front runner, meaning when she gets you on your heels, she does very, very well. When you fight back against the bully and she has to deal with some adversity, that's been her problem in her UFC career. The problem is she got in the UFC, I want to say her third fight, something like that. The UFC is not the place to learn how to fight. Right? It's really tough learning on the job in the UFC. She's still 6-3. She's done okay. Ranked 10th in division, has always had trouble making 135 pounds. That's going to be difficult. But I still think she has the size. I still think she has the aggression. Kianzad has done just enough to keep from getting cut at 5-4 in the UFC. Kianzad can come back late in fights if you don't put her away or really just absolutely maul her. But in this case, I think what happens is Chiasson, once again, is too big, too physical, too strong. We either see an opportunistic submission, meaning rear naked choke or guillotine, in the first 2 rounds, or she builds up enough of a lead that she might lose that round number 3 and still have enough to win. Macy Chiasson, a huge favorite, and I happen to agree with that one. There we go. Moving on. This one is Isaac Dulgarian versus Christian Rodriguez. Christian Rodriguez is on a 3-fight win streak. The problem is he's too big for 135. He's having trouble making the bantamweight limit. Not a knockout puncher at 35. Beat Raul Rosas Jr. in what was a big upset at the time. Raul Rosas Jr. just getting started and him losing to a more experienced guy isn't that weird. He's just consistent. He's just unflappable. He just mentally stays tough for 15 minutes and doesn't get overwhelmed by the moment, doesn't get overwhelmed by his opponent. He's well coached, solid guy. I don't think that warrants a move up to 145 where he can clearly make the weight. And boy, he's going to have success at 135. At 145. I don't see that. He's just not he's having trouble making weight, but he isn't one of those guys I look at and go, oh my God. Song Yadong, I was saying last week, that guy's a huge 135er. He may even translate to 145. I don't see Christian Rodriguez doing that. Dulgarian just starting his UFC career, 1-0, but he's a hot prospect. Looked good his first time out. Very, very aggressive. Great on the ground. Excellent ground and pound. And I think probably considering he's taking on a lighter guy, this is where that one goes. I would say second round TKO by ground and pound for Dulgarian. So, moving up, another fighter, speaking of fighter that I don't have a lot of faith in, at 205, OSP, Ovan Senpru. I don't know who else thought when they saw this matchup, dude, OSP's still fighting. He's just been around forever, had some decent wins back in the day. Anybody that relies on the Von Flue choke, I just automatically go, because if you don't know jiu-jitsu, you have to make some mistakes to get into the Von Flue position. So he kind of made his name out of this kind of like weird submission style where he takes advantage of mistakes and finishes you. Not the most technical guy in the world. Great athlete. Played football at Tennessee. Big, strong, had a good fight. One of John Jones's closest fights is when he came back and fought OSP. But never elite. His last few fights, he's looked absolutely awful. That fight with Shogun, I'm trying to scrub it out of my cold, dead eyeballs. That was a really ugly fight. He's just at the end of his run. The athleticism that made him a factor early is just wearing down. It doesn't last. Also, durability. Whenever a big part of your weapon, your offensive weaponry is you're durable, well, that runs out. You take one too many beatings, you're not the same guy. OSP is just here, right? And the fact that he's taking on Kennedy Enjuku, 6-4 in the UFC, who his strategy is kind of like walk forward and wear you down. Now, against Dustin Jacoby, that bit him in the ass. Dustin Jacoby, an excellent kickboxer, caught him, dropped him early. But it's the exact wrong kind of fighter for a guy like OSP to deal with. A guy he's a slow starter, so OSP might have some success early. He's a really slow starter. OSP might have some success early, but I see Enjuku just at a certain point walking him down, wearing him out. He isn't what he used to be when he was younger, and taking probably a third-round stoppage. The odds are absolutely absurd in this one. Depending on your book, he's like a 6-1, 5.5-1 favorite. You can get, plus 400 money on OSP. Sure, throw a side bet at him. I think you're bucking the trend. OSP, I didn't have a lot of faith in him in his prime, let alone now. So I think this is one of those that's pretty obvious which way this one's going to go. But the money is absurd. Might be worth a side bet. Brian Battle versus Ang Lusa. Ang Lusa 2-1, just getting started in the UFC. Brian Battle, Ultimate Fighter winner, 5-1. Brian Battle was one of those guys who, at 185, I don't think he was disciplined enough. He's a gigantic 170-pounder. I think at 185, it kind of allowed his kind of lack of athleticism to betray him. He was just taking on bigger guys. You need that. You need some X factor. And I talk about this a lot on this channel. If you want to be truly great, you need that little thing that puts you above in some category over everybody else. I don't believe Brian Battle had that at 185. At 170, he is a monster. Big dude, really, really strong. If you can take him down, take him out of his element, make it about his gas tank and his technique and all this stuff, you can beat him. Does Ang Lusa have that ability? That is really the question here. I think Ang Lusa, if this fight goes long enough, might have the ability to get Brian Battle out of his comfort zone. I don't think it does. I think Brian Battle, because of his size and his ability to put a fight where he wants it, probably wins this one. I would say second round for Brian Battle. He's a slight favorite. I'm going with Brian Battle. Now, that brings us to the main event. Tai Tuivasa versus Marcin Tybura. Look, the Tai Tuivasas of the world, meaning across combat sports, guys like Tai Tuivasa, right? The Mark Hunts of the world, the Ray Seffos of the world. David Tua, if you're an old school boxing fan. Limited, heavy puncher, stocky, strong, big, a lot of fun. He's so entertaining to watch. Those guys don't get to the top, generally speaking. Trying to think of an exception right now in my head. Can't think of any. But guys like that tend to just hit a ceiling. Like Mark Hunt and Ray Seffo, and even in kickboxing, boxing, David Tua, when he took on the excellent talent of his generation, couldn't get over that hump. That's Tai Tuivasa. Now, that doesn't mean he can't beat the Marcin Tyburas of the world. In fact, that's kind of what he's there for, is to beat the Marcin Tyburas of the world and have the shoey and super fun and everybody loves him. Marcin Tybura is kind of an anomaly in that he's built a little bit like Tai Tuivasa, but relies more on his grappling. The heavy hitters, which are Tai Tuivasa's kind of bread and butter, if you slug it out with Tai Tuivasa, he can knock you out, have been a problem for Marcin Tybura. When he's faced the guys who could really hit, Derek Lewis, for example, he would get hit and dropped, and that was kind of it. He can get you to the ground and use his size, does have a decent submission game, all that stuff, and take you out of your element. He can do something. He's not the greatest wrestler on earth. He's not, Curtis Blades, right? When you look at his wrestling ability, it's comparatively good for the weight class. That was always Stipe's kind of ace in the hole, is I can take you down when I need to. I don't see that in Marcin Tybura. I think Marcin Tybura is going to have to get in a scrap at some point early in this fight in order to get something done, and that's going to bite him. If we end up seeing anything past round 2, you have to go with Tai Tuivasa. Now, what's interesting about this fight is they are 9th and 10th in the division. I don't see either guy getting to the top. I don't see either guy breaking through, having a run. Both guys have lost to everybody they've faced who is that next level guy, right? Cyril Gane, of course, just tuned up Tai Tuivasa, lost to Alexander Volkov by Ezekiel choke last time out, just exhausted and couldn't handle a simple submission that almost never works nogi. And, we see the ceiling on these guys, so a big part of it is going to be the mental side. Something gets taken out of you, and it's almost like the Super Bowl loss letdown, where got to the Super Bowl, came up short, the next year that team almost always sucks. It's just, I see kind of where the ceiling is and where I'm going to go, and is this still worth it? You start asking yourself those existential questions. Tai Tuivasa doesn't strike me as that guy. He's like, hey, I'm getting paid, I'm knocking people out, sweet. So I think that the mental side, which, remember, he went on a 3-fight losing streak before, came back from that, he's on a 3-fight losing streak now. I don't think it's going to have the mental hangover that it enforces on a lot of fighters. This is almost a pick'em fight, depending on your book. I think Tai Tuivasa is a slight favorite. That might change by the time the fight actually rolls around. But I'm going with Tai Tuivasa. I still think he has enough in the tank for an early knockout. So he stays interesting against Marcin Tybura, early knockout. Let me know what you guys think. Like, subscribe, comment here for you guys. Appreciate all the comments and love. You guys are awesome.